Alright, so we've got this lifted up, so now we're going to just try some light pry bar and just pull this right up and out of here. You might need to get a couple of little spacers. That's a little bit too thick to put underneath of this, or you can just grab a hold of it and pull it out. So that's what the throat looks like. You have an O-ring right here, but there are never going to be shims underneath of this, so you don't have to be paying attention for that. So we'll put this down in our cart to be clean. So now we have our 4-point bearing completely exposed, which is right here. This is our 4-point bearing. This is the outer race right here, and this is the inner race right there. Okay, now we're ready to extract the 4-point bearing. There's not really too many different ways to get this out. There are 4 drilled holes around the outside, and sometimes what you can do is you can actually put a piece in here across like this. A couple of Allen wrenches sometimes work, and let's see here. Yeah, you can just stick a couple of Allen wrenches straight through like that, and then, or what you can do too is you can place a couple of bolts in here. There's a couple of ways to do this, and everyone's different, because if they're really rusted in here and really tough to get out, you're gonna have to get a little bit creative. There's always more than one way to do most jobs, so you're gonna have to just get creative here. So I just take a couple of crowbars like this underneath of whatever I stick through there and pry up gently until the 4-point bearing comes up and out like that. And also the bolts that you put on here are going to enable you to just pull the whole thing out just like that. So there's your 4-point bearing, and it's pretty typical that they're going to have a bunch of food grease on there, and they're going to probably be stinky as well. But so that's your 4-point bearing, and this, typically when you do a service like this, you want to check this 4-point bearing for excessive play, which we will go over. And if you have excessive play in this part, then you for sure want to replace it with a new one. So that's your whole cavity there. It has grease in it, so now you need to spend some time and clean this all up. Get some rags and some contact cleaner and clean this area up very, very well. All of this area needs to be cleaned. So this whole bottom end is completely disassembled at this point. And right now, we'll go ahead and try to disassemble this as well, which we're going to need to get an impact on those, because those are really tight. So we'll get the necessary tools and get that out of there. Okay, now we're going to just go ahead and remove this slide ring. This is pretty heavily worn here, so we're going to just take this out, completely disassemble the whole machine so we can get it all cleaned up. And typically these fasteners are going to be Loctited in, typically with blue Loctite. So you may have to get an impact, either a flathead screw or a Phillips screw impact that you hit with a hammer to break these free. These typically have just straight slotted countersunk screws, not these Phillips. So we'll make sure we put the correct fasteners in when we put this back together. So you got all your screws there, set those over there, and now this should just come out get a small screwdriver here and maybe just give it a little tap to get it started. And always be careful here, because there very well could be shims underneath of here, between here and the bottom of the hopper. Most of the time there are shims in there. So we're going to go ahead and replace this part with a new one. So we'll get all these parts cleaned up and we'll reassemble. Okay, we're ready to start the reassembly process. We've got all of our parts clean. We're going to install the 4-point bearing first. One thing that you need to make sure of once you get this cavity all good and cleaned out is to check the pinion gear down inside here and check that for wear. And this particular part does need to be replaced, so we will be doing that after this. You need to pull the hydraulic motor that this pinion gear slides onto, that shaft. You need to pull that down and out. That would be down through this side of the machine, and we will be replacing the pinion gear. But that can be done at a later time, but you get the visual inspection at this time. So this for sure needs to be replaced, and we will replace it once we're done with the 4-point bearing installation. So what's very important on this is you need to mark the grease ports. There's 2 grease ports down here. And so what I've done is I've actually taken a pen and put a line on each one of them. And on the 4-point bearing, I've taken and put a line on each grease port here as well. I'll spin it around. And so on the bottom of each grease port, there's a little counter bore that receives an O-ring. So you need to take a little bit of food grease, smear it in that counter bore, and place a new O-ring in each one of those grease ports. So I've already done that. So now we're ready to go ahead and install the 4-point bearing. And it's easier if you take a couple of 10mm bolts and thread them in, so you have some way to hold on to the part as you place it in that cavity. So we're going to go ahead and install this now. And also you see these threaded studs here. I like to use these. These are just 8mm threaded studs. You can take a bolt, long bolt, and cut the head off. And this just aligns the bolt holes so you get it close, sliding down into place. So that's what the purpose of those are. Okay, so we're going to just take this guy and we're going to set this in here, aligning our bolts and our grease ports. So we actually have our grease port lines all lining up now. These yellow lines line up across the board so we know they're in the right place. And so you can just take this, drop the 4-point bearing right in like that, pull the studs out here that I have, the alignment studs, and then you can remove these bolts that you used as handles. So those are in place. Okay, so next, 4-point bearing is in place. We're going to go ahead and insert the throat. So make sure that you put a new O-ring on this right here, which we've already done. And we're going to take a bit of food grease and we're going to grease this down here so this slides in. And we're also going to take a little bit here and just grease this O-ring. So again, every O-ring should have grease when you are assembling it. Now there's not really any alignment tool for putting this throat in, and it gets a little bit challenging, if you will. So there's a pocket right here that is in here to remove the red urethane seal. And this pocket always goes on the operator side, directly right here. So that's going to be your big indicator. So that's going to go directly there. So what I like to do is take a couple of longer threaded studs. These are 8mm. And I like to just thread these in to these holes so you can align it as it goes down. We might have to fine tune it after we get it in place, but these will help us at least get it close. So we're ready to go ahead and install this. And then just drop that into place. And we can push that down, kind of center it up there. So now, one other thing, I need to make sure that I put that O-ring. There's 3 of these O-rings, and we need to put the O-ring on the top of that 4-point bearing. So I'm going to take a little bit of grease. I'm going to put it down here in this counter bore, and then I'm going to take my O-ring, stick it on my finger, and place it in place. I've got the 2 O-rings on the bottom side of that inner race, and then there's the one that goes on the top. So all 3 of my O-rings have been installed. I like to get all my parts laid out so I know exactly what's been installed. So all of my O-rings are in place. So now we can go ahead and drive this down. There's no shims that go in here at all. This is just straight face-to-face assembly. So I'm going to go ahead and tap this down. And then once you get it down to a point that you can get the bolts in, then you can stop hitting it with a hammer, and then you can just pull it down with the bolts. We're getting close. Actually, I think I'm at that point. And I like to take a little bit of anti-seize on these. Because we are going to be putting some load on them, pulling this down. And anti-seize is always a good thing when you're pulling with the fastener. So we're going to go ahead and pull this all the way down, and at that point we're going to check the clearance of a double screw housing, because if this is actually cocked in this this bore that it slides into, it will prevent the double screw housing from sliding in and out properly. So we're going to pull this down, and then we're going to check that fit.